Start?
Absolutely.
It's nearly 5 past, yeah. Oh, Adam McGovern's coming in, 21. Okay. All right then, Charlie.
We are recording.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the International GP14 stand at the virtual RYA Dinghy Show. I'm Gill Beddow, and I'm currently training coordinator for the GP14 class. So before I introduce Sam, a few little housekeeping reminders. No, I'm not going to point out the fire exits, and I'm not going to remind you of social distancing or wearing a mask, but I am going to ask you to put yourselves on mute, and so you'll stop any background noise distracting the chat. So I'm sure that at some point, some of you will want to put questions to Sam, and he is quite happy for you to do that. So if you could type them in, preferably in caps so that I can see them easily, we'll try and get them in at some point or other during the chat. So let's get on to our first talk of the day, and I'm sure Sam needs no introduction, and we're going to hear how he started sailing and, dare I say, his journey to winning the GP14 Youth Championship 3 times and then progressing on to become national champion in 2019. I know, Sam, that it's nice to see you, and I know this is a little bit early for you. You've already told me that normally there's only one 10 o'clock in the day, and it's not the morning one. So I'm really pleased you're up and having a coffee. Hope everybody else has got a coffee, and off we go. So, Sam, how did you start sailing? When and how did you start sailing?
As you've already heard from Sally, it was many years ago, nearly over 20 years ago now, actually, which is a bit daunting. But it was at Nantwich Sailing Club where my granddad took me for a learn to sail week, I think it was back then. And from then I was hooked. So we were at Nantwich for many years, just club racing at Nantwich, which was great. My dad bought me a mini sail at the time, and I'm not sure if any of the faces here from Nantwich can remember, but this mini sail was pretty awful. It had a rope tied to the boom that you used to sheet in, which was a bit crazy. But that was the boat that I learned to sail in, and yeah, really learnt the basics from, which was great, really. Then progressed into the squad structure. So I went into toppers through the Northwest Zone squad to start off with, and then to the national squad, and then to the youth squad, where I really learnt a lot about racing. Really, that's where I learned, I'd say, the majority of my racing knowledge. And then further on to 29ers, where again we learnt lots in terms of high performance dinghy sailing, which is a little bit different to the GP, but there's definitely things which relate to the GP, sailing boats like that. I then bought a TP. I then bought a GP14, probably, gosh, when I was about 23, 24, I think I was. 23, I'd say. 13710 was mine and Andy Hunter's first GP14, which was an old speedboat. It was great. It was pretty old though, but it did get us to the front of the fleet, and as you say, the youth championships, and that boat was the boat that we sailed and we won our first youths in. So yeah, that's a bit of my background really, and that's how I learned to sail, and then yeah, progressed into the GP finally.
So actually, Sam, you'd say that you've had quite a bit of experience in other classes as well as GPs. Would you say that during that time, crewing for somebody else who was probably better than you was a good way to improve and increase your understanding, or have you always helmed?
No, absolutely. I'd like to say that I've always helmed, because I definitely enjoy it, and I'm definitely better in the back of a boat than I am the front of the boat. But I have sat in the front of many people's boats. Just some names off the top of my head, I did a lot of sailing with Matt Burks, who was a fellow Nantwich sailor, who kind of took me under his wing and taught me how to fly a spinnaker and taught me how to sail a GP14 really. Dave Edwards also helped me out a lot. I remember crewing a couple of Nantwich Opens with Dave Edwards, which was fun. So yeah, definitely, I definitely remember being in the front of the boat years and years and years ago with people like that. But I'm a massive, massive advocate to say it's extremely important to still do that, whether you're at the back of the fleet or whether you're at the front of the fleet, because you do learn so much from putting yourself into the position of a crew or a helm if you're a crew. You do learn lots. You learn how to manage your boat, so it's a little bit easier for the person that you're sailing with, and all these little things might make you both be a little bit faster in your next competition. But yeah, I can certainly a massive advocate for that. I've very often sat at the back of a boat and shouted at one of my crews saying, "Why can't you put that spinnaker pole on faster?" I've said that so many times and I've got so angry about it, and then I've had a go and I'm 1,000 times slower. So it's definitely important to respect the conditions that you sometimes put your fellow sailor in, because quite often I don't, and it's definitely something that you need to do.
So I'm assuming that when you were GP sailing, and so when you must have gone to the E. Howard Davies week.
I did, yeah.
Probably Plas or Crosby, maybe. How did you find that? I
went to Plas. So for everyone on the call, the Howard Davies week is a week which is subsidised by the Howard Davies Fund, and it basically is a week to help youth sailors progress, really. And I went to it a lot. I think I probably did about, I'd say 3 or 4 of them. I remember a couple at Plasma and I remember one at Crosby. And those weeks were brilliant. We'd sail all week. We'd get up at ridiculously early in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, and sail all the way through to 6 o'clock at night, which was great. I learned an absolute shed load from them weeks. Mainly sort of boat speed sort of things, and we had some really good coaches like Adam Parry. We had Phil Hodgkins one year, and and other spot coaches would come in. I remember Mike Senior being there, so it was a really good way to learn from these experienced sailors. And for any young uns that are listening right now, it's definitely worth putting your name forwards for that week, because it's a bargain, and I learned lots from it.
Who would you say has probably influenced you most? I mean, you've mentioned quite a few people, but has anybody in particular been important or formed your main role model?
Yeah, there's been lots of people, to be honest with you, Jill. At the start, it was definitely my dad. My dad would drive me around everywhere. He'd drive me to Carnac and to Garda, and then all around the UK to go to these events. And back then, when you're a 14, 15-year-old lad, you don't really appreciate it. But yeah, definitely appreciate it now, because I don't think I'd be able to do it for a young and if I had a young. But yeah, so that was definitely my first role model that was very underappreciated. I'm not sure if he's listening to this, but I don't want to blow his ego up anymore. Second role model would probably be, I've already mentioned them, but a few sailors from Nantwich. Yeah, so the likes of Dave Edwards, really. He was very influential in my sailing at younger years. He'd always be there with to sort the boat out, whether the boat broke. He'd always be there to drive us to an event. When I was sailing with Andy Hunter, he'd always be there to buy us a bacon butty if we didn't have enough money to buy bacon butty. So yeah, he was very, very good for that. And then again, yeah, I've mentioned other people. I sailed with Matt Burks for quite some time, and I really learned a lot. Matt was a really, really knowledgeable bloke. He was an ex-windsurfer, so he knew a lot about the wind, and he knew a lot more. Well, he was just more experienced than I was.
Yeah.
I learned loads from Matt. I've really got to take my hat off to Matt Burks, because he taught me a lot about how to sail a GP, how to crew a GP as well. Actually, that was probably the
Yes.
most important thing.
Yeah.
I had no clue.
So, so you won the youth nationals 3 times.
Yes.
I think, was it? Yes. So what was the last year that you won that?
It was the last year that I was young enough, which would have been, oh goodness me, 7 years ago. So that would have been 2015, I think. Maybe even before that, actually. Maybe even 2014, possibly. But you're making me feel old now, Jill. God.
No, I'm sure I'm not. So the next thing I want to get onto then is boat prep, physical prep, mental prep, and how you go about. So probably this may amuse a few people, but would you say you were an organised person, and do you have a checklist that you would go through? So buoyancy aid, spinnaker pole, rudder, bungs and boat certificate, or do you rely quite a lot on your crew?
I think you're speaking to the wrong person here, Jill.
Yes.
Can anyone help me with that?
I thought I might be.
I actually used to write a list on my boat back when I was young, and I did it in the GP as well, actually, a few times. I'd get a Chinagraph pencil and I'd write on the deck of the boat things to not forget, and I always remember the biggest one being there, and this has stung me a lot in the past, is my bung. So the bung would be at the top of the list. And there's a few people on the call that I've definitely sailed with that would kick me for not writing that on the boat. Yeah, I remember sailing at the Worlds in Barbados, and we went out and it was blowing 20-25 knots, and this numpty here didn't put his bung in, so it didn't really help much.
I think you're a repeat offender on that front, Sam.
Well,
So,
in all seriousness, yeah, there's a lot of preparation that sort of goes into any event that I go to now,
yeah.
whether it's a small local event or whether it's a world championships. But there's loads to do. There's loads of venue preparation that you can look at, knowing where the wind's going to be coming from, knowing if there's going to be sort of a gain feature at that event. So I always check the event out. A good example is actually the image which is behind Jill there, Abersock. Abersoc's a really beautiful place to sail, but there's some massive gain features to have there. You can see the hills in the background there, the wind loves, and you can actually see from the picture that the wind is coming from them hills. And the wind loves to roll down them hills, and when it does roll down the hills, it likes to come in certain directions, and it oscillates. And you can find this all out from before you get to an event, or maybe if you get there a day before an event, you can go for a sail and figure that out.
Yeah.
There's definitely lots of preparation to be done in terms of venue preparation. Tides as well, for example, it's quite important to get out there and have a look at the tide whilst you're out there, get to a channel marker or get to a mark of any sort and chuck a bottle of water in the water to see which way the tide's going. Make sure it's a full bottle of water though. I've messed up with that one before. Otherwise it just floats and the wind takes it wherever it wants to take it.
Yes.
But then on top of venue preparation, there's lots of boat preparation that you can do as well. I call them the controllables. So there's lots of controllable elements to preparing for a campaign, which a lot of people don't control. And I definitely haven't controlled in the past. Things like changing your ropes before an event to make sure they're not going to snap when you get to a windward mark. Checking your spinnaker halyard, because that's one that loves to snap on you. And then there's yourself as well. There's obviously physical and mental preparation that you can do before an event, and I don't think I'm the right person to talk about that, if I'm honest with you.
Diet, does diet come into it or not?
I'd love to say
At an event, that is.
love to say it did, but I can see a crate of beer on the kitchen side just over there at the minute. So we'll diverse. We'll go straight past that one, please, Jill.
Okay, fine. So, was there? What was the key after you'd won the youth championships? What was the key that changed you, or was it a light bulb moment to realise that major championships were in your grasp?
Lots of, yeah. They've always been in my mind. I've always wanted to. I remember training for the excuse me. I remember training for Stratford Lock Worlds, which were in 2014. And that was the first event, 2014. So that's probably just after we won one of our last youths. And I remember training for that event, saying we're going to win this. We're definitely going to win this Worlds. We came second in the end, so Ian Dobson. But it was definitely a massive step up from where we came from. So we went from winning the youths and comfortably finishing sort of top 20, top 30 at a national level to jumping up to coming second at the Worlds. And the main thing that really got us there was time in the boat. We just put a hell of a lot of practice in. We'd be out on the water 3 times a week. I've got pictures that pop up on my phone of us sailing back in the pitch black because we just were training non-stop before that event. We sort of probably did about 3 months of really hard training. We'd be sailing 3 times a week, and we'd be either in the gym or running together 3-4 times a week as well. So yeah, that was the main thing that really got me started. But then sort of the last couple of years, I've learned lots as well in terms of, and I'd say this was a massive help for Abersock when I won, when me and Shandy won. I've learned that you can't go to a sailing event and expect to win every race, because it's not possible, unfortunately. In our fleet, it's definitely not possible. So many good sailors, and you've really got to limit risk, and sail your championship and not just that individual race. That's only something that I've learned in the last, as I say, couple of years. Really, I'd go in, I'd want to win every race, and I'd be a risky person, and I'd start at a start line in the best position every single time. And it's a massive risk, because not only do I want to be there, but every other sailor on the start line wants to be there as well. So 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to have your best start, because you've got somebody who's probably better than you on your shoulder racing you. So yeah, taking risk was, or not taking risk was something that I've picked up recently.
Yes.
And then, so in that situation, instead of starting right at the favoured end of the line, maybe you just start a couple of boat lengths away from that favoured end of the line to give yourself a little bit less risk and hopefully have a little bit of a better start than the people that are all crowded down at the port end of the line or something like that.
One of the things that people often put to me is, in fact, I was only talking to somebody the other day, somebody similar age to you actually, and he said, if only I'd have realised when I was younger that if I didn't get heated in the boat and get and have a go at the crew, we would sail an awful lot better. Would you have said? Are you usually calm in the boat with your crew, or do you find that you do get a little heated at times?
Yeah, definitely, and I'd agree with whoever this is that you've spoken to, because that's again something that I've only learned again in the last few years, really. Yeah, there's been many occasions that I can remember, unfortunately, where I've had a bust up with a crew during an event, because it just gets heated and you both want to win, and sometimes you don't win. So yeah, I've definitely had many experiences of that I won't bring up. But yeah, I was sailing with Shandy over in Ireland. We did a few events over there, and sometimes events don't go the way that you want. We sailed the Northern event, which is God, you're gonna hate me for forgetting this, Shandy. I can't remember what it's called now. It was up at Loch Foyle, and we didn't have the best of events, and Shane McCarthy was beating us I think we were coming third or fourth. He was way ahead of us, and we won it on the last race by 1 point. By joint points, I think it was actually. I think we just managed to beat him in the last race. And that was because we'd taken a really laid back approach to that event. We thought we couldn't win it, so we relaxed a little bit. And we did better because of it. But yeah, I definitely wish that I'd had a few changes in circumstances and in the years gone by and been a little bit more relaxed about it. But it's so hard. I actually used to have maybe this is an anger management problem, but I used to have a big red button in the front of my boat that I'd used to go and punch if I got angry, and then that was a reset button. So I wasn't allowed to shout at the crew, or I wasn't allowed to shout at myself. I could just hit this big button, and then we were all done and dusted, and you've got to crack on with your race.
Very good. You'd recommend that then. So what sort of sailing conditions do you prefer? Do you like light wind? Are you happy with any sort of wind strength, or do you prefer it when it's we'll say more exciting, so the wind strength's up a bit? What's your preference?
My preference has always been the big breeze. Yeah, big breeze and big waves has always been my preference. It might not suit me because I'm not the biggest of blokes, but I've always just much more enjoyed it, really. It's just way more fun. And it has meant that we've had to do a few things slightly differently to other people. We've had to set our rig up slightly less powered up, more depowered, to be able to keep up with some of the faster people in the fleet, or the bigger blokes in the fleet. It tends to be when it's windy. And we've also had to change other things to make us go faster than them in other situations, like downwind, for example, because we're a little bit lighter. We could tend to have a bit of a speed advantage downwind. But yeah, I'd definitely say my favourite sort of breeze is the big stuff. The light stuff tends to catch me out a lot, and it's much harder to pull yourself back in the light stuff, I find. You can kind of manhandle your way around a race course when it's blowing 20 knots, but when it's blowing 3 knots, it takes a lot more skill to get yourself to the front of the fleet that I quite often lack. But
you'd probably say then that the weight in the boat, it's technique and adjusting the rig that probably counters the weight, different weights in different boats. It's all about technique, really.
Massively, yeah. Technique's the biggest part of it, really. Keeping that, if you can do things to keep the boat flat without being a really big guy, it's great. Using your control lines effectively, making sure that you've pulled it down all as far down as you can when it's conditions like we see behind us. But also, it's quite a funny one, really. But I'd quite regularly jump in the water just before a start line to give myself an extra couple of kilograms. To soak up all of the water before I'd start hiking out. And it makes it a little bit harder hiking out when you're soaking wet, but gives you a little bit more weight on the side of the boat.
I think I've just seen one of the questions that's coming, which might just be related to this. It says, how does Sam feel if he's at a disadvantage with his rig set differently in heavy wind? But obviously, I think you've probably just answered that question, haven't you?
Yeah,
set the rig differently depending on. Okay.
I'd say it's definitely an advantage for people like me, but just because I've not got the weight there, really. It's definitely an advantage for the smaller crews to think about your rake and think about your rig before you go sailing. It's a fundamental, really, if you want to keep up with some of the bigger and faster boats.
So finally, what is it about the GP14 that attracts you and keeps you competing, and how do you think it would be best to attract younger people into the class?
The GP for me is all about the close racing. The GP is quite a slow boat, so it means the people at the front of the fleet don't go much faster than the people at the back of the fleet. There's really not much of a speed difference, which is great because it means that it's really a tactical and strategic boat, really. It's the people that get the strategy right and the people that get their tactics right that get to the front of the fleet, which is what I love. I've sailed lots of fast boats where it's not like that. The likes of asymmetric boats where it's a speed race is a very different type of racing. I also love the old school sort of symmetrical spinnaker set up in the GP. It means that technical racing also applies to downwind sailing, where in some of the faster asymmetric boats it doesn't really. Excuse me. So yeah, there's some of the main reasons that I love the GP. The next biggest one is the people, really. Not only do we have some of the best sailors in the country, really.
Yeah.
We've got the likes of Ian Dobson and Andy Tunnicliffe. We've got the likes of Mike, who's on next. We've got some really, really good sailors that are multinational and multi-world champions.
Yeah.
So it's great to be able to race against them. It's great to be able to see if you can keep up with them, which I love.
Yeah.
And then not only do we have fantastically good sailors, and not only that, we've also got Olympians in the fleet, which is just phenomenal, really. We race against the likes of Jer, who is an Irish. He was at London 2012 representing Ireland. So we've got some fantastic talent in the fleet, which is great to race against. But then not only that, we've also got cracking people. I love rocking up to an event and being able to have a laugh with these people as well. It's not as strict as some of the competitions. So yeah, that's why I love it.
We do seem to attract other, certainly in last years, we do seem to attract really good sailors from other classes as well to our main events. They obviously like sailing the GP and find it a challenge against our own better good sailors. So that's quite good, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So finally, what advice would you give to young sailors?
From my past experience, I'd say get sailing, get to the likes of the training week that we mentioned before. The Howard Davies training week was great for me. It really, really helped. I'd also say get to your local competitions as soon as we're allowed. Get to your open meetings, because time on the water is extremely important. Not only if you can practice yourself, it's very important. You can learn the basics of sailing, and you can get very, very good at sailing. But then when you get to an event, you can start learning about sailing against other people. So there's a definite need for both sorts of training, in my opinion. Not only do you need to train yourself and train to become better at tacking and jibing and rounding marks, but you've also got to make sure you get the time on the water against other boats.
So Sam, thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of our chat. I hope everybody that's been listening has enjoyed it. Thank you, Sam, for spending time with me this morning. It's been most interesting and enlightening, and I'm sorry I got you up so early. But thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
So before everybody leaves this Zoom meeting, just a reminder that today there are 2 more talks at 12 o'clock. There's Women Who Win. That should be really interesting. And at 1 o'clock, Mike Senior is going to talk to us about tips to progress from competent sailor to championship winner. And you can find all these links on the GP14 stand at the bottom of if you scroll down the bottom of the page. Tomorrow, another set of excellent talks, and would you believe, Fitness for Sailing starts off tomorrow. So I hope you enjoy them all. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
have a good day.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye, thanks, Sam.
Cheers, Curly.